Hello everyone and welcome to All Things Watched. In this video we are going to talk about the brand new movie MaXXXine, and apparently this was actually the third and final movie in a Thai West horror trilogy, and I actually did see the first two movies, which were simply called X, and then of course Pearl. In fact, last year I think it was last year or 2022, might have been 2 years ago now, I actually deemed Pearl as probably one of my favorite horror movies of the entire year, but I had no idea personally that this was actually, they were all connected and that these movies were a trilogy. And of course this trilogy stars Mia Goth, who portrays MaXXXine Minx in both X and of course also now in this one MaXXXine, but in the movie Pearl she portrays someone as Pearl, and the only way that I could sort of put it together as to how Pearl could be a prequel to X while also having Mia Goth portray the same character, or at least be the same actor portraying a character in a prequel type movie that took place during World War I, was that I just sort of chalked it up as she was playing someone who was a part of her lineage. So maybe Pearl was like a great-grandmother to MaXXXine from X, and now this movie, which is actually called MaXXXine, is now more of a sequel to X. They do a lot of callbacks to the movie X. Of course, Jenna Ortega was in that movie as well. I think that movie took place like in the 60s, I think, or maybe 70s. Either 50s, 60s, or 70s, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was like the 60s. This one I think takes place in the 70s or 80s, so this is a sequel, whereas Pearl takes place during, I think, the First World War, like early 1900s, so it's very likely that Pearl was like MaXXXine's great-great-grandmother. But either way, each of the three movies had a very common theme, which is, of course, MaXXXine, or in Pearl, all trying to make their way in the entertainment world, but while also at the same time sort of having this very dark side, and also finding themselves constantly in these very weird, dark situations. You know, in X, Mia Goth's character MaXXXine finds herself in a weird situation where she's gone off to this old farmhouse trying to basically produce adult content, and ends up sort of having this dispute with this old family, and it was just really weird, and a lot of really bad stuff goes down. Then when you go back to the 1900s, Pearl, she was also someone aspiring to be an actor, wanting that showbiz life, who ends up killing someone as well. And now of course we get to MaXXXine, which sort of goes full circle, and we sort of learn a little bit more about MaXXXine as a character, and she is still traumatized from the events of X. There do be some flashbacks there, so it was really cool. I really like that aspect of the movie. I do think that at least for my opinion, and believe me, it's only subjective, maybe you won't agree with me, maybe you will, but I think Pearl was the best of all three movies. I love Pearl. I also am a big fan of period pieces. Now all three of these movies technically are a period piece because they take place in a different time period. But I do think that Pearl was best. I also think that Pearl, Mia Goth gave her best performance in Pearl as well. She did a really good job in this movie MaXXXine, and also in X2 as well. But I do think that Pearl, for me, was the standout, and I also like Pearl the most of all three movies. I did like this movie the least. If I were to order this trilogy, I would say I liked Pearl the most, and then X, and then this movie MaXXXine. And the reason why the biggest flaw that I had with this movie was not the performances. I thought Mia Goth once again did a phenomenal performance. I think she's a great actor and going to be an amazing horror upcoming actor. But the biggest problem that I have with this movie was that I feel like they tried to go too big. It was too grandeur. It really I really missed that small containment that both X and Pearl had. A very small contained movie which took place for the most part in one single environment, and usually dealt with one single issue or one single form of conflict, so to speak. Whereas this movie, I feel like they went a lot bigger. It was, as opposed to being like a small grounded story, it was more grandiose. There was like helicopters at the end of the movie. There was this like cult, so to speak. So to me, this didn't really feel like the typical slasher, so to speak, horror drama that the first two were. This one felt more of like, I just felt like because they went this sort of cultist route, it really took me out of it. And I really think that the movie worked better when it was in like X and Pearl, when it was just grounded to one single event, so to speak, and one single story containing one little single a couple single characters. Whereas this one, like I said, it was more grandiose. It was, MaXXXine is going, there's different settings and different locations and a whole bunch of people involved, especially with this cult, so to speak, which was sort of led by this, I believe his name was Ernest. Was it Ernest, or I think his name was Ernest, yeah. It was led by Ernest, and I just really felt like that whole cult aspect really took away from the franchise. Really, like I said, the first movie dealt with one single family. The second movie, Pearl, dealt with basically one single situation, kind of like a one-on-one. Pearl was sort of like taking care of this person and whatnot. But once again, it still felt very, you know, in line with, say, X. You know, even though they're two completely different time periods, and for that matter, even two different characters still portrayed by Mia Goth, I feel like they were still very similar, where this one I feel like was just, it was too much. So for me at least, like I said, you might have seen this movie and loved it. Like I said, I did think Mia Goth did a great job, but for me, I did feel like this one was a little bit too much. They should have kept it a little smaller, a little more well-grounded. You know, there was multiple murder, so to speak. This one was, you know, dealt with almost something that was almost like a serial killer, so to speak, and then they tried to sort of wrap it up with you know, with MaXXXine's story, and maybe some people that are involved has to do with MaXXXine's family and whatnot, so, and that type of thing. So I really wish they had stuck to like the more X and Pearl sort of format, where it's just smaller, more contained, and didn't really deal with like this big cult, and you know, there's a lot of like shooting and that sort of action in this movie, which was not in the previous movies. In the previous movies, it was very up close and personal, a lot of like violent acts of, you know, using actual like stabbing, like knives or weaponry, but not like guns, and that's something else that sort of took me out of this. I would not say that this was like a slasher. The first two were not really slashers, but they were more slasher-ish than this one, and I feel like that really took me out of it. So if I had to put a number on MaXXXine, I would probably give this one like a 60%. I would give Pearl probably like a 75 or even 80%, and I would have given X probably like 65 or 70, probably 70. I think I would give X like a 70%, because the ending was really good in X, and I think that Pearl would be the highest, definitely like 75, maybe even 80. For me, this one was landing at like a 60%. I did like it the least. Still love the performances overall, but I did feel like this was, you know, a very big leap, you know, a big leap away from what the franchise, you know, was already established in the first two movies. I feel like this one really stepped outside of that format, almost a little bit too much. But anyways, folks, that's just my opinion, and all these things are subjective. So let me know in the comment section below if you've seen MaXXXine, and if you liked it, tell me why or why not. If you like this video, click that subscribe button, and until the next one, take care.